Well. So, what can we take away from this Republican primary between Thomas Massie and Ed Gilrain? Ed Gilrain is a former U.S. Navy SEAL, current farmer, I guess, in Kentucky. And Thomas Massie, also farmer, and he was also a veteran, and he had been the representative for his district since 2012. So about 14 years. When it comes to the U.S. House of Representatives, you got to renew it. You got to run for it every 2 years. Every 2 years. And in this election, he was primaried by someone who was actually being supported by the President of the United States himself and the head of the Republican Party himself, Donald Trump. And the results, well, not so good for Thomas Massie. About 55-45, 55 for Galbraith, 45 for Massie. About like a 10,000, 12,000 vote difference. A bit over 40,000 for Massie, or 50,000 a bit for around there for Galbraith. And here's the thing. Massie, I was looking into it, has a lot of, I can say friends, but let's say in the right wing media, he wasn't seen negatively, really. I was also looking into, a lot of interviews doing there for his constituents, and they really liked him. They really did. Who knows where all these votes for Gallerin have come from? I saw in some comments they were like, "Oh, check those machines, fraud, or maybe who knows." What we do know though is that Massie has conceded, so there is that at least. There is that legitimacy. Conceded, a man who's very popular nationwide, who survived the Obama presidency, Trump first presidency, Biden, and he loses his seat in the second Trump presidency. Somebody who's very libertarian, mostly libertarian, but that's the catch though, because I remember seeing his interview with Fox News. He was talking about how he has received a lot of support from local farmers and all that in his area, from pro-life groups, from for example, it's very interesting because he actually voted recently, as you all know. It wasn't just a topic of the funding for the war against Iran that he was opposed to, but actually the big beautiful bill, so called, that Trump passed last year. He actually voted against it. And it's interesting because one of the things that he said, it wasn't just because it increased the debt, it was also because it had a certain less funding for the border, which that's a whole nother debate. I do think a country has to protect its borders, but it's very interesting how he brings that specific example. So in a sense, it's like, yeah, Trump is pouring all this money on ICE, but he's also putting less money on border patrol. Very interesting. And the other thing was that in the big beautiful bill, so called, there was certain restrictions that were being put on the funding that there was originally from the Trump administration, the blocking of the funding for transgender surgeries, especially for minors. The big beautiful bill resumed that funding, and Massie voted against it. And it's interesting seeing and how in his Fox News interview he actually explicitly says, "I voted against that." So I've actually been in concordance with what President Trump has been aiming at. And if you look at his voting record, it was about like high 80s, like 89%. He's actually voted with Trump. But everybody remembers this, him with Ro Khanna, him, speaking against the war, speaking against funding for Israel, speaking on releasing the Epstein files, just very condescendingly, referring to certain politicians, as, wanting things with kids and protecting, those type of despicable individuals. So in the end, really, what is this defeat about? Because if he's such a big friends with all the right wing groups and has voted in the majority of time with the president, well, I guess it is true, like he said, my seat is not for sale, and a foreign country just bought it. So you could say, indeed, and interesting and very funny in his concession speech, Massie talks. Yeah, I called my opponent, and we're trying to find him in Tel Aviv, Tel Aviv, one important cities in Israel. So could it be, perhaps, could it be that Israel has bought, a race? I think that's very alarming, really. To see that financing from a whole nother nation can have pull such strings. Yeah, I mean, it does, through the Anti Defamation League and especially APAC. All that funding that it does, both sides of the both parties, Democrats and Republicans. But now it's specifically taking down. It already happened, with, for example, Jamal Bowman. Happened with Corey Bush. They're trying to do it with Ilan Omar and Rashid Tlaib. But now, specifically, it has happened in their own trench. And somebody who's supposed to and who has voted with their guy, with the president 89% of the time, they're taking that guy out, from their own party, from their own trench, using their strings. And I was seeing also a video earlier too, can't remember his name exactly, but it's someone, CEO of a media company. He talks about how, you can't go against the Jewish American lobby against us because we will make your life miserable. We will use our connections and our funding that we have in the media and in the political circles to take you down. So now it's not that this is all anti-Semitism propaganda. No, they're explicitly saying, hey, don't mess with us because we have the means to make sure that you're out of the game. And it's funny too, unfortunately, because when they were doing the analysis, the election night, one of the Trump aides actually posted, I think on Truth Social, so called, saying "F Iran," the insult "F Iran" and find out. So yeah, you cross our president, you go against his foreign policy, in this case, funding Israel, funding the Iran war. We're gonna take you out. This, they say, the Trump revenge tour. First with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and now with Thomas Massie. And then, of course, Thomas Massie, just like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like MTG, reaching across the aisle for releasing the Epstein file, something that, fortunately, hasn't. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, fortunately, a lot of stuff has been released thanks to a lot of their efforts, but there's a lot that hasn't been released either. But Thomas Massie was one of the proponents of, having this be known, And so in those big things, voting against the big beautiful bill, but then also specifically, Epstein files and the war with Iran, it seems like, that is what really capitalized his decapitation. And that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate to see how, there's that blatant amount of corruption in the U.S. government. And it's all in front of our eyes, So who knows how far this can go. Because now they've done it, with someone from their own kind, from their own party. Someone who, in interviews, talks about how, a lot of the conservative groups support him, even though he's a libertarian. Someone who has a lot of support, you could see it from average people, from his own constituents. Someone who is from a small district that's not quite significant in the United States. But specifically, they targeted that seat. So if this starts here, how much more can this tentacles expand into, taking out voices who are against specific major policies that not just deal with the U.S. but also with a foreign country like Israel, and with also something that's so important like the Epstein files. How much can money now really affect, and how far will this go? So yeah, good luck. See you.